It was past midnight on April 26, 1977. Four fishermen rowed silently near Crab Island, at the mouth of the Amazon. The water was calm, the sky dark. Then a light. It wasn't the moon. It wasn't a beacon. It was something descending directly upon them. The light intensified until it became blinding. The men felt scorching heat. Two of them fell to the bottom of the boat, convulsing. One of them would never wake up again. The official medical report would say, cerebral infarction. But what happened that night in the waters off northern Brazil was just the beginning of something that would force the Brazilian Air Force to launch a secret military operation that would generate more than 2,000 pages of classified documents, and that, decades later, would still have no definitive explanation. Today we're going to talk about one of the most disturbing and well-documented cases in the history of encounters with unidentified aerial phenomena. A case that involved hundreds of victims, professional medical testimony, an official military investigation, and which culminated in declassified documents that can be consulted in the Brazilian National Archives. Between 1977 and 1978, on the remote island of Colares in the state of Pará, Brazil, something terrorized an entire population. The locals called it chupa-chupa, the sucker. Lights in the sky attacked people at night, leaving strange burns, puncture marks in their skin, and in some cases, death. What makes this case different isn't just the number of witnesses. It's that the Brazilian Air Force took the allegations seriously and sent an entire military team to investigate. For 4 months, intelligence officers documented sightings, took photographs, filmed videos, and interviewed dozens of victims. The result was Operação Prato, Operation Plate, a code name for one of the most exhaustive military UFO investigations ever conducted. And then, mysteriously, everything was classified. For decades, the archives remained sealed. Until 2008, under pressure from ufologists and journalists, Brazil began declassifying documents. What emerged was a story that defies simple explanation. Today we're going to review this case from the beginning, with verifiable data, first-hand accounts, and the many theories that attempt to explain what really happened in Colares. The place. To understand this story, you first need to understand where it happened. Colares is a small island at the mouth of the Amazon River, in the state of Pará, in northern Brazil. In 1977, it was a deeply isolated place. We're talking about fishing and farming communities, many without electricity, connected to the outside world only by boat. The majority of the inhabitants were riverine and rural residents, people who lived off fishing and subsistence farming. There was no television in most homes. Newspapers arrived days late, if at all. This detail is important, because when dozens of people in such a community begin reporting the same thing, independently, without prior coordination, it's harder to attribute it to media contamination or mass hysteria. The political context. Brazil was under a military dictatorship. The country had been ruled by the military since 1964, and although the regime was slowly opening up, it remained a national security state. This is relevant because when reports of strange objects in the skies above the Amazon began, they weren't ignored. The National Intelligence Service, SNI, coordinated the response. This was serious to them. It could be foreign technology, unauthorized incursions into Brazilian airspace, or something completely unknown. Whatever it was, they wanted answers. The first reports. Before reaching Colares, there were signs. In June, July, and August 1977, newspapers in the state of Maranhão, a neighboring state of Pará, began publishing strange stories. In municipalities such as Pinheiro, Cajapeão, São Vicente, and São Bento, residents reported attacks by mysterious lights and flashing lights. People talked about lights chasing people, emitting lightning, and causing burns. Some related it to local folklore, the Mapinguari, creatures from Amazonian mythology. Others didn't know what to think. The reports multiplied, and they moved north, toward Pará. April 26, 1977, the first fatal attack. Let's go back to that April night. For fishermen, whose names were not recorded in public reports, were working near Crab Island. It was a night of fishing like any other. Until it wasn't. A bright light appeared in the sky. It wasn't an airplane. There was no engine noise. It wasn't flashing like navigation lights. It was a solid, bright light descending directly toward them. What happened next was documented in the medical report. 2 of the fishermen suffered serious injuries. Witnesses described burns, convulsions, and extreme disorientation. One of the men lost consciousness immediately. By the time they reached land and managed to get medical help, it was too late for one of them. The official report stated the cause of death as cerebral infarction. But the survivors told a different story. They spoke of a beam of light that seemed to suck something out of them, of unbearable heat, of the sensation that something was being extracted from their bodies. The term chupa chupa began to circulate. The sucker. Something that drained people's energy. The wave begins. Show. Map with dots marking locations. April turned into May. May turned into June. And the reports kept coming. It wasn't just an isolated person. It wasn't just one night. It was systematic. The descriptions were consistent. Lights in the sky descending towards the houses. Rays of light, often green, blue, or yellow. The lights were specifically seeking people. Burns on the body, especially on the chest and arms. A feeling of paralysis during the attack. Extreme weakness lasting for days or weeks afterward. People were afraid to sleep. They began taking turns keeping watch. They lit fires all night, believing the fire would drive away the lights. Some abandoned their homes and went to live with relatives in other areas. But the lights kept appearing. Ademar de Paiseo. October 1977. Ademar de Paiseo was sleeping at her cousin's house because she no longer felt safe in her own home. Everyone on the island knew the stories. Everyone knew someone who had been attacked. Around midnight, Ademar woke up. I'm going to read his testimony verbatim because it's important that you hear his own words. I tried to find a place to sleep. The next thing you know, me noy ricordi con un forte claro. Green spotlight descending directly onto her chest, on the left side. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. Paralysis. One of the most reported features. He couldn't move. He couldn't scream. He could only feel. I felt a quentura, a heat, and then that light source was gathering when I saw that it was burned. When the light finally faded, Ademar had burn marks on her chest. But they weren't normal burns. She described the sensation as if needles inside the beam were being stabbed into her skin. She was treated at the local health unit. Headaches and weakness plagued her for weeks. But here's the most disturbing part. Years later, Ademar was still experiencing the same symptoms. Sudden headaches. Unexplained weakness. In her own words, "My health seems to have never been the same after the accident." Dr. Wellaide Carvalho, the medical witness. If this story only consisted of testimonies from frightened civilians, it would be easy to dismiss. But that's not the case. Meet Dr. Wellaide Carvalho. In December 1976, just 2 days after graduating with a medical degree from the Federal University of Para, Wellaide was appointed head of the Colares Health Unit. She was 21 years old, at the top of her academic class among women, and ready for her first professional experience. He had no idea what he was getting into. During her time at Colares, Dr. Carvalho treated approximately 80 victims of the attacks. Not 1 or 2. 80. And what she saw left her perplexed. Show. Medical notes or recreation. Patients arrived with a consistent clinical picture. Superficial burns with strange patterns. Tiny holes in the skin like punctures. Generalized paresis. Extreme muscle weakness. Hyperthermia. Elevated body temperature. Severe anemia. Blood tests showed a drastic decrease in red blood cells and hemoglobin. Nausea, tremors, dizziness. But there was something that particularly puzzled her: the speed of the necrosis. In normal burns, from fire, boiling water or chemicals, tissue necrosis, tissue death, occurs after approximately 96 hours. It's a gradual process. In these victims, necrosis appeared within minutes. Dr. Carvalho was a skeptic by nature. She was a scientist. She looked for rational explanations, but she couldn't find any that fit what she was seeing. In an interview years later, she was very clear about her patients. "I didn't see any white or blonde people. The vast majority of the victims were farmers, fishermen, and housewives, married, and who didn't drink alcohol." Why does he mention this? Because he was anticipating the obvious question. Could it be fabrication? Hysteria? Alcoholism? Their answer was no. These were hardworking, sober people with no history of mental problems or erratic behavior. The deaths. And then there were those who didn't survive. Dr. Carvalho confirmed at least 3 deaths of women she treated directly. There may have been more cases that didn't reach her office. In his words, the 2 people who died had nothing special in common, except heart problems. In other words, they didn't die as a result of the assault they suffered, but because they couldn't withstand its consequences. Let me repeat that. They didn't die directly from the burns or injuries. They died because their bodies, already weakened by pre-existing conditions, couldn't withstand the trauma of whatever had happened to them. It's as if the event was so extremely stressful on the system that it caused heart failure in vulnerable people. The military response. By October 1977, the situation in Colares was unbearable. People were terrified. The stories had reached Belém, the state capital. Newspapers were beginning to publish the allegations. And the Northern Regional Aeronautical Command, the ICOMER, decided to act. A special military team was formed. The mission was called Operação Prato, Operation Plate, a seemingly innocuous codename for something extraordinary. The man chosen to lead it was Captain Weirainge Bolivar Soares Nogueira da Hollanda Lima. Hollanda wasn't just any officer. He had 24 years of experience in the Air Force's Intelligence Service, the A-2. He was a pilot, a paratrooper, and a jungle operations specialist. He spoke English and French fluently. He had commanded counterintelligence and guerrilla combat units. If anyone was qualified to investigate something like this, it was him. But before assigning him the mission, his superior, Colonel Camilo Ferraz de Barros, asked him a direct question. "Do you believe in flying saucers?" Hollanda answered yes. "Then you are in charge of that case." November 1st, 1977. A UH-1H helicopter landed in Colares. On board were 5 military personnel, including Hollanda and Colonel Camilo Ferraz. They carried surveillance equipment, cameras, video cameras, recording equipment, measuring instruments. The mission was clear: document the phenomena, interview witnesses, search for physical evidence, and determine what the heck was going on. For the next 4 months, the team kept nightly vigils. They positioned themselves at different points on the island, waiting, watching the sky. And they saw things. Military sightings. The notes of Sergeant João Flávio de Freitas Costa, who produced the report of the first raid, October 20th to November 11th, described objects moving in ways that defied conventional physics. Instant accelerations from 0 to extreme speeds. Right-angle changes of direction without deceleration. Silent flight. Lights with cylindrical, conical, and spherical shapes. Objects that seemed to respond to the lights the military used to signal them. "Read it again," they responded. Hollanda described in later interviews that when they pointed lights or lasers at objects, they often changed course or moved closer to the equipment, as if they were aware. On one occasion, Hollanda himself reported seeing 30-story, high cylindrical ships less than 100 meters away. 30 floors. That's a building about 100 meters tall. Suspended in the air. Silent. The length of a football field. The team managed to document everything. More than 500 photographs. Several videos, estimated at 16 hours of total recording. 2,000 pages of written reports. Interviews with dozens of witnesses. And then, in December 1977, the operation was abruptly called off. The sudden end. No one gave a clear explanation as to why Opera Prado was discontinued so suddenly. The equipment was removed. The files were classified. And the final report that Captain Hollanda submitted to his superiors said something he himself would deny 2 decades later. There are no signs of extraterrestrial beings in the city of Colares. But Sergeant João Flavio de Freitas Costa's preliminary report said something very different. He concluded that the observed objects were intelligently directed. What happened between one report and the next? Why did the official conclusion contradict what the researchers themselves had witnessed? This question would remain unanswered for 20 years. 2 decades of silence. The years passed. Colares returned to normal, or at least to a semblance of normality. The sightings gradually decreased during 1978 and eventually ceased. People went on with their lives. The victims lived with the aftermath. And the documents remained sealed in the military archives. But some people did not forget. Brazilian ufologists such as Daniel Rebisso Giese began investigating on their own in the 1980s. American journalist Bob Pratt traveled to Brazil in 1981 and managed to interview Hollanda himself, although he was cautious about what he revealed at the time. And in 1988, an international investigator would come to change the profile of the case. Jacques Vallée. Jacques Vallée, astrophysicist, computer scientist, and one of the world's most respected ufologists. Partial inspiration for François Truffaut's character in Spielberg's film, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Vallée arrived in Brazil in 1988 specifically to investigate the Colares case. He interviewed Dr. Wellaide Carvalho. He spoke with witnesses. He compiled medical documentation, which he found important enough to include in his book, Confrontations, A Scientist's Search for Alien Contact, 1990. Vallée was particularly intrigued by the medical evidence. The burns, the punctures, the sudden anemia. It didn't fit with known natural phenomena. It didn't fit with hallucinations or hysteria. In his analysis, Vallée noted similarities with military research on high-power microwave weapons, HPM. But even that explanation left unanswered questions. 1997. Holland speaks. September 1997. Rio de Janeiro. The now retired Colonel Weerainge Hollanda agreed to give a public interview to a group of ufologists. After 2 decades of silence, he finally spoke. And what he said was explosive. Hollanda contradicted the official report he himself had signed. He openly stated, UFOs exist. The armed forces investigate their maneuvers and hide the fact from the population. He described multiple sightings. Craft of varying shapes and sizes. Intelligent behavior. Interaction with military equipment. He confirmed that he had personally interviewed many victims with real injuries. He described the strange pattern. The light beams were precisely directed at the left breast in women and the left arm or leg in men.
Why?
What could explain this specificity? Nobody knows. Hollanda also spoke about the documented material, the 500 photographs, the 16 hours of video, the 2,000 pages of reports. All classified. All out of public view. The conference caused a sensation in the Brazilian and international UFO community. 1 month later, October 2nd, 1997, Cabo Frio. Weerainge Hollanda was found dead in his apartment. He committed suicide by hanging. His daughter and stepdaughter were in the house. He was 56 years old. Conspiracy theories immediately exploded. Had he been silenced? Did he know too much? Was he pressured to reveal classified information? Ufologist Marco Petit exhaustively investigated the circumstances of her death. He interviewed family members, reviewed police reports, and spoke with neighbors. His conclusion, published in UFO magazine, was suicide. Hollanda was going through severe personal problems. His death, although tragic, showed no signs of outside intervention. But the timing, just a month after breaking the silence, remains one of those coincidences that fuels doubt. The campaign for declassification. For years, Brazilian ufologists have pressured the government for transparency. In 2004, the Brazilian Commission of Ufologists, CBU, launched a formal campaign for freedom of information about UFOs. They collected thousands of signatures. They submitted formal petitions. They argued that if there was nothing to hide, why keep the documents classified for decades? And finally, the government gave in. 2008 to 2009, the archives open. On October 31, 2008, Halloween, ironically, the Brazilian National Archives received the first set of declassified documents on UFOs from the Aeronautical Documentation Center. In April 2009, more batches were released. Today, anyone can access these documents. They are available in the National Archives Information System, (CION), under the code BR-DFANS-BRX, UFO Collection. In total, the collection contains 743 documents related to UFO investigations in Brazil from 1952 to 2016. They include questionnaires about events, correspondence, photographs, some audios, and videos. But there's a problem: the missing material. Remember, Operation Prado produced 2,000 pages of reports, 500 photographs, and 16 hours of video. How much is in the National Archives? 300 pages and 150 photographs. 80% of the material is missing. The videos are virtually non-existent in public archives. Pilot reports. Hundreds of photographs. Missing. Where is the rest? Is it still classified under higher levels of secrecy? Was it destroyed? Is it in the private files of retired officers? No one has given a satisfactory answer. So, what really happened in Colares? Let me introduce you to the main theories, with their arguments and weaknesses. Theory 1. Extraterrestrial ships. The hypothesis: the objects were ships of extraterrestrial origin, piloted or controlled by non-human intelligences, conducting some kind of experiment or study on the local population. Arguments in favor. Intelligent behavior. Objects responded to stimuli, avoided collisions, and appeared to actively seek out people. Advanced technology. Impossible accelerations, silent flight, ability to project unknown energy beams. Military testimony. They weren't scared civilians. They were trained intelligence officers with years of experience. Actual physical effects. Burns, punctures, and blood changes were medically documented. Consistency. Hundreds of witnesses independently described similar phenomena. Weaknesses. There is no definitive physical proof of extraterrestrial origin. No fragments of the alleged ships were recovered. There is no evidence of direct communication or contact. The why question. Why Colares? Why that specific period? Theory 2. Military experiment, ground-based. The hypothesis: the objects were advanced military technology, possibly American or Soviet, being tested in a remote region with the local population as unconsenting test subjects. Arguments in favor. Cold War period. 1977 was the height of the Cold War. Both sides were developing exotic weapons, directed energy weapons. Research into military lasers and microwave weapons already existed. The Amazon as a testing ground, remote, isolated, vulnerable population without legal resources. Abrupt cancellation. This would explain why the operation was suddenly discontinued. Orders from above. Missing material. 80% of missing documents suggest deliberate concealment. Weaknesses. Does not explain reported aerodynamic capabilities. Instant changes in direction. Why would the Brazilian Air Force itself investigate something they themselves were doing? There is no documentary evidence of collaboration with foreign powers in experiments of this type. The military investigators showed genuine perplexity. Theory 3. Natural phenomena. The hypothesis: the events were caused by poorly understood atmospheric or geological phenomena, ball lightning, ionized plasma, electrical discharges related to tectonic or geomagnetic activity in the region. Arguments in favor. Amazon region. High humidity, frequent storms, conditions for unusual electrical phenomena. Mouth of the Amazon. Unique interaction between fresh and salt water, possible effect on electromagnetic fields. Ball lightning, a real, although rare, phenomenon that produces luminous spheres that can float and move erratically. Effects on humans. Electric shocks can cause burns, temporary paralysis, cardiovascular effects. Entity-free explanation. Does not require assuming external intelligence or conspiracies. Weaknesses. It does not explain the apparently directed and selective behavior. Ball lightning doesn't last for hours or chase people. Does not explain specific injury patterns, left chest in women, extremities in men. Does not explain the solid structures reported by multiple observers. Dr. Carvalho ruled out simple natural explanations based on medical evidence. Theory 4. Psychosocial phenomenon/collective hysteria. The hypothesis. The events were primarily psychological, a combination of misinterpretations of normal phenomena, reinforced by collective fear, local folklore, and cultural contamination among witnesses. Arguments in favor. Social isolation. Close communities are more susceptible to shared beliefs. Pre-existing folklore. The region has traditions about mysterious entities, Mapinguari, etc. Domino effect. An initial report can generate more reports by suggestion. Stress and trauma can produce real physical symptoms, psychosomatic. Confirmation bias. Military investigators arrived expecting to find something strange. Weaknesses. Very difficult to sustain given the medically documented physical evidence. It does not explain the photographs and videos taken by the military. The injuries were confirmed by a skeptical medical professional. Blood tests showed objective changes, anemia. Dr. Carvalho specifically rejected this hypothesis. There was no significant media pollution in 1977 on an island without television. Multiple independent observers, civilian and military, reported the same thing. Theory 5. Hybrid/unknown phenomenon. The hypothesis. The phenomenon could be something that doesn't fit completely into any existing category, possibly a combination of natural, technological, and even psychological elements that we don't yet understand. Arguments in favor. Admit our ignorance. Recognize that not everything has an immediate explanation. Explain contradictions. Why different aspects point to different explanations. Historical precedent. Many phenomena that we understand today were impossible in their time. Flexibility. Allows for new evidence without discarding existing evidence. Weaknesses. It's not really an explanation, but an admission of lack of explanation. It can be used to avoid rigorous analysis. It is not scientifically falsifiable. Regardless of which theory you prefer, there are elements of the Colares case that no conventional explanation satisfactorily resolves. 1. The specific pattern of injuries. Why did lightning strikes consistently target the left breast in women and the left extremities in men? If these were random phenomena, natural or technological, we would expect random distribution. But there was specificity. 2. Rapid necrosis. The burns showed tissue death within minutes, not days as is typically the case. What type of energy could cause this effect? Dr. Carvalho had no explanation. 3. Hematological changes. Sudden anemia, a dramatic decrease in red blood cells, is seen in many patients. It's not something caused by psychological stress or superficial burns. It suggests something deeper. 4. Intelligent behavior. The objects seemed to respond to the researchers. They changed course when illuminated. They specifically sought people. They avoided collisions. This level of directed behavior goes beyond random natural phenomena. 5. Trans-temporal consistency. The reports were consistent for months, from hundreds of witnesses, in multiple locations. This goes far beyond a single event or temporary hysteria. 6. The military testimony. These weren't suggestible civilians. They were intelligence officers, pilots, specialists. And they too saw, documented, and couldn't explain what they witnessed. 7. The missing material. Where are the other 1,700 pages? The 350 photographs? The 16 hours of video? If they didn't show anything extraordinary, why weren't they released with the rest? The victims. For the people of Colares, this wasn't an interesting case study. It was trauma. Clodomira de Paiseo lived the rest of her life with aftereffects. Other victims reported the same. They never fully recovered their health. Chronic pain, persistent fatigue, permanent changes in their lives. Some people left the island. Others simply learned to live with the fear and the memories. And at least 3 women, possibly more, died. Those names matter. Even though we don't know them all, they were real people with families, lives, and dreams. This case has a human cost we cannot forget. Influence on ufology. The Colares case became one of the most cited in world UFO literature. Jacques Vallée included it in his database for the Pentagon. Yes, you read that right. In 2009, the secret U.S. OSAP, Advanced Aerospace Weapon System Applications Program, the Pentagon's program that investigated UFOs, sent 2 teams to Brazil. One interviewed all surviving witnesses and compiled documentation. The other met with political and military authorities in Brasilia. Why was the Pentagon interested in a Brazilian case from the 1970s? Because Colares represents something rare, a case with official documentation, medical evidence, multiple credible witnesses, and a military investigation. It is one of the few cases that crosses the line between UFO history and documented event with tangible evidence. Cultural recognition. In 2024, Rede Globo, Brazil's largest television network, launched a 13-episode investigative podcast on Apercao Prado. Not a sensationalist program. A serious documentary directed by Ivan Mizanzuk, hosted by André Fernandes. That says something. Almost 50 years later, the case remains relevant, intriguing, unsolved. The scientific question. Jacques Vallée, in his conclusions about Colares, wrote something important. The material gathered represents only a portion of the cases I have personally investigated and a very small percentage of the data compiled by other researchers and by official agencies. The realization that none of this material has been seriously examined by professional scientists is astonishing. That is perhaps the real tragedy of cases like Colares. It's not that there isn't evidence. It's that the evidence isn't being studied with the rigor it deserves. The documents are there. The medical records are there. The photographs, at least some of them, are there. But how many university laboratories have analyzed them? How many multidisciplinary scientific teams have seriously investigated them? Very few. And meanwhile, the case remains in limbo, too strange to ignore, too uncomfortable to study openly. So, what conclusion do we draw from all this? Honestly, I don't know if we can draw a definitive conclusion. And I think that's fine. What we can say with certainty: something happened in Colares. Hundreds of people experienced something. Many were injured. Some died. A medical professional documented injuries she couldn't explain. An official military operation investigated for months and documented phenomena that defied their own expectations. That's real. Now, what exactly was it? That's where certainties end and interpretations begin. Were they visitors from another world? Possibly. Was it secret Earth technology? Maybe. A natural phenomenon we don't yet fully understand? It's a possibility. Or something completely outside our current categories of understanding. We can't rule it out. What I find most fascinating about this case isn't choosing an answer. It's that it forces us to ask better questions. What do we really know about our planet? About the phenomena occurring in remote regions? About the intersection of technology, nature, and human experience? Cases like Colares remind us that the universe is bigger, stranger, more mysterious than our everyday explanations suggest. And maybe, just maybe, that's not something to fear. Maybe it's something to explore. For skeptics. If you're skeptical, I completely respect you. Healthy skepticism is essential for critical thinking. But I ask you one thing. Read the original documents. They're publicly available at the Brazilian National Archives. Review the medical records. Look at the declassified photographs. I'm not asking you to believe in aliens. I'm asking you to recognize that there's something here that deserves serious, scientific, unbiased investigation. For believers, if you are already convinced that this was an extraterrestrial encounter, I also ask you something. Maintain rigor. It's easy to let the desire to believe lead us to jump to conclusions. But the strongest cases are those where we maintain high standards of evidence. Colares is strong precisely because we don't need to embellish. The documented facts are already extraordinary. For everyone, this case happened almost 50 years ago. Most of the key witnesses have already passed away. Dr. Wellaide Carvalho, Captain Hollanda, and many of the victims. But their testimonies remain. The documents remain. The questions remain. And maybe that's the important thing. Not all questions have immediate answers. But as long as we continue to ask, research, document, and remain open to the unknown without losing critical thinking, we keep moving forward. The Colares incident remains one of the most intriguing cases in the history of unidentified aerial phenomena. It has elements that make it unique: official military documentation, professional medical evidence, multiple independent witnesses, and a government investigation with declassified documents. And yet, after nearly 5 decades, we still lack a definitive explanation that answers all the questions. Perhaps Colares' most important lesson isn't about UFOs or aliens or natural phenomena. Maybe it's about humility. Humility to recognize that we don't know everything. That the world, and perhaps the universe, still hold secrets. That the line between the known and the unknown is thinner than we like to admit. And it's okay not to have all the answers. If this case has intrigued you, there's much more to explore. Documents from Brazil's National Archives are available online. Books by Jacques Vallée and Bob Pratt offer more in-depth research. Globo's 2024 podcast features extensive interviews with investigators and surviving witnesses. The information is there. The questions are there. The answers? Well, maybe that depends on you. Thank you for joining me on this investigation. If you found this interesting, please consider leaving a like. It helps me a lot to know you enjoy this type of content. Subscribe if you want more documented cases of unexplained phenomena, mysterious history, and the science of the strange. And let me know in the comments, which theory seems most plausible to you? Do you have any explanations I haven't considered? Do you know of other similar cases I should investigate? I love reading your comments, and often you guys are the ones who give me ideas for the next videos. See you in the next episode. And remember, keep your eyes on the sky but your feet on the ground.